Harvard professor Elizabeth Warren has her biggest lead yet over Republican incumbent Senator Scott Brown in a new University of Massachusetts Boston Herald poll out today, 49% to 42%. That is an absolutely devastating poll for an incumbent senator. Any sitting senator running for re-election goes into full panic mode as soon as his or her polling number drops below 50%. The rule in politics is an incumbent polling at 42% absolutely cannot win re-election, even if the incumbent's opponent is polling below that number, because usually the undecided voters break for the challenger instead of the incumbent. But in this case, the incumbent's challenger is at 49%, 7 points ahead, with only 6% undecided. Republicans know how much trouble they are in Massachusetts in that Senate race, which is why Karl Rove's group, Crossroads GPS, is running this ad against Elizabeth Warren.
The first thing I'm going to promise is that I'm going to be a voice in the room on behalf of middle-class families.
Really? Congress had Warren oversee how your tax dollars were spent, bailing out the same banks that helped cause the financial meltdown, bailouts that helped pay big bonuses to bank executives while middle-class Americans lost out. Later, Warren went on a charm offensive with some of the same banks who got bailed out. Tell Professor Warren, we need jobs, not more bailouts and bigger government.
Joining me now for an exclusive interview, Massachusetts Democratic senatorial candidate Elizabeth Warren. Thanks for joining me tonight, Professor.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You know, I can tell in that attack ad that they are using the word professor as an insult, as something you should run away from, that how dare a professor, a Harvard professor, run for the United States Senate. How are you countering that in my old neighborhood in Dorchester at the other end of the red line from Harvard Square?
You know, all I can say is, yeah, I have a job at Harvard, but I wasn't born at Harvard. I worked hard. I grew up in a family kind of on the ragged edges of the middle class and got a good education. I grew up in an America that invested in kids like me. And ultimately, that's how I ended up at a place like Harvard. But what I really care about is keeping those opportunities open for the next generation of kids and the next generation and the generation after that. That's what I really think this election is about.
Now, did you see it coming that they were going to attack you as a friend of Wall Street and protector of Wall Street and coddler of the billionaires?
Well, let me put it this way. You know, I knew that Wall Street was going to come after me with everything they had. There was no doubt they want to make sure that I don't get to be the next senator from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But it seems like the strategy now is the kitchen sink strategy. You know, throw anything you can at her and let's see what happens. You know, let's keep in mind what was going on just a little over 3 years ago. Karl Rove was part of the inner circle while George W. Bush is telling Congress and a nation, we got to bail out the big financial institutions. His Secretary of the Treasury is handing out money to the largest financial institutions, no strings attached. I go down to Washington and I'm calling him out for it. I'm calling him out on executive bonuses. I'm calling him out on the fact that they're giving this money away, no strings attached, and I get attacked for it. Okay, then we roll forward 3 years. Now Karl Rove takes money from Wall Street in order to attack Elizabeth Warren for being cozy with Wall Street. This one just goes beyond anything I had ever imagined. I really am. I'm just amazed. It leaves you speechless.
Well, I think Rove's going to find out that Massachusetts voters are a little smarter than that. I'm going to do the whole interview in my Boston accent, by the way. It just makes me feel at home. Now, there was a very interesting vote in the Senate today. Richard Cordray was up for to be confirmed to run the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, something you helped create in legislation. Got a majority vote, got 53 votes, which, as we know, in the United States Senate is no longer good enough because they were trying to get past cloture to move to the actual nomination vote. There was one Republican vote in favor, and that was the Republican senator from Massachusetts who you were running against. Do you think you might have had any effect on him already?
You know, I don't know, but I'm glad to see him vote in favor of Rich Cordray. I just wish that every other Republican hadn't been out there trying to block it. You know, I just want to tie those two together. together, because remember, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is there for regular families. It's there so they don't get gouged on credit cards and on mortgages and on student loans, but they won't get their full power until they get a confirmed director. And we've now got Wall Street's best friends in the Senate blocking confirmation of Rich Cordry solely to try to hinder this agency, to try to keep it from some real, calling for some real accountability over Wall Street. So, you know, both these pieces are tied together. Wall Street is still calling the shots for a whole lot of folks in Washington.
Now, that's clearly, to me, Senator Brown trying to pick a spot where he can vote the way you would. He's trying to narrow this gap between the two of you and on what you're going to have to argue about in this campaign. I imagine he's got a bunch of votes in his time in the Senate now that he would like to have some do-overs on now that he's in a campaign against you.
Yeah, you know, you remember last month we had votes on 3 jobs bills in a row. The first one would have supported 22,000 jobs in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts at a time when we've got about 250,000 people who are unemployed. Scott Brown and every other Republican voted against it because it would have meant a tax increase, just a tiny one, for those making $1 million or more. The next week, a vote to try to prevent layoffs for teachers, firefighters, and police officers, again paid for by a small tax on millionaires. Scott Brown and every other Republican voted against it. And then the third week, 11,000 jobs in the transportation industry, primarily infrastructure, good construction jobs that we really need in Massachusetts and work we need to get done, would have created a 0.7% increase on those making $1 million or more. Scott Brown and every other Republican voted against it. You know, I think in this election, all I really have to do is just get out there and tell the truth.
When the professional election analysts look at polls, they look at the so-called internals, the questions asked inside the poll beyond just, you know, who do you favor. There's a very powerful one in this University of Massachusetts Boston Herald poll that you're leading in. It says 43% say that Elizabeth Warren would do a better job looking out for the middle class. 33% said Scott Brown would do a better job. That seems to me to be the essential internal question of this election in voters' minds. And that, by the way, is not a poll that the Boston Herald can be all that happy about. I'm going to have to share with our audience what I think you and I both know. There's pretty much no chance of the conservative Boston Herald endorsing Elizabeth Warren when we get down to the election here. But there it is. They have a poll showing you with a substantial margin above Scott Brown in terms of trust from the middle class on their issues. That seems to me to be where this election is going to be fought.
You know, you are right that this election is going to be fought over what's happening to America's middle class. They've been hammered for a generation now, and Washington doesn't get it. Washington is wired to work for those who can hire an army of lobbyists. It's wired to work for Wall Street. I go out around the Commonwealth of Massachusetts all I can every day, and I talk to families, and they just keep saying it's not working for us. Washington isn't working for us, and that's why they want to get involved in this campaign. You know, people are enthusiastic about this. They want to make some changes, and I'm there with them. I think that's right.
Elizabeth Warren, thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.